Hi class. Purpose of this video is to give you some review concepts and to talk about the research essay. So first of all, let's have a throwback concept to something we should know very well by now, which is SQ3R, survey, question, read, recall, review. And in that SQ3R system, uh, we are thinking about um, the survey portion of the book, our book, Introduction, the Norton Introduction. And in that book, as you know from your survey from quite a long time ago, but I want to review and remind that on page 1053 is Writing About Literature, part 4 of the book, which is very useful as you're thinking through the research essay that you're writing and the research essay that you're providing research about your topic. So how do I do certain things are answered in this portion of the text. So I just want to highlight some of the main ideas and then look at a research essay example, which is at the end of this section on page 1134 is the sample research essay. So let's begin by looking at page 1059 and seeing how to use description in the writing of my research essay. Description is really important because it describes, as we've been talking about in the class, what the motives of a character can be, what the setting can look like, what my relationship to me as a reader, what my relationship is to this story, and how I'm focusing my research essay. So if I look at the description on page 1059, I can learn quite a bit. The short story, this is about Americans. So this is an example of description from an essay. The short story Americans, in quotation marks the title is, consists of only 25 paragraphs narrated in English by someone we ultimately learn is a young girl, paragraph 8, named Michaela, paragraph 14. But the narration oscillates between first-person singular and plural, and the story includes dialogue in Spanish and translated from Spanish. Though set in Mexico City, Mexico, the story also moves between two settings and the characters associated with each, with Michaela the only character connecting the two. The first 5 paragraphs narrated in first-person plural, "We're waiting," paragraph 1, focus mainly on the awful grandmother, paragraph 1, and the dark church inside which she prays. Here, we also get some of her words reported in italics, presumably because they are translated, paragraph 2. So what you are getting is a description of the overall work by Sandra Cisneros that is helping you as the reader of this essay orient in the essay. So description goes back to our concept of describe, decode, connect. How can I describe what's happening in the poem or the short story? How can I decode the language, which is, remember, foregrounded in front of us, integrated throughout the text, and it needs me as the interpreter, the reader as the interpreter? How can I use this description and this describe, decode, connect as a way to function in relation to the reader, providing information to the reader, situating the reader. So for short stories, I use paragraph numbers, paragraph 8, whatever. For poems, I use line numbers. And also, a couple pages over now, let's move on from description. literary present tense on page 1061. Bottom, ways of setting the right tone. Write about literature in the present tense. Flat out. So the story wasn't about a handicapped person in the story Cathedral by Raymond Carver. It is about a handicapped person. So keep it in literary present tense. And then our favorite topic, thesis statement, occurs on the bottom of page 1062. A thesis in this text is described as a thesis is to an essay what a theme is to a short story, play, or poem. The governing idea or claim. And we've used the word claim many times in the class. You are making a claim concerning your literary text of choice, and that claim must be arguable. And you must situate the reader, again, by stating what the title is of the work that you're analyzing and who its author is. So you've got title, author, claim in your thesis statement. The claim is by far the most difficult, as you all know from having done this. On page 1067, I'm zooming ahead to evidence, which is a massive part of the research essay. What kind of evidence do I have? Which depends on how good my research is. How do I use the evidence? Do I paraphrase, quote, describe? That's very important. And how do I create in-text citations? How do I create a works cited page? Those are the main ideas that are covered in this portion. And it's important to review all of them so that you can, in your research essay, show me that you know how to use an in-text citation with the author and the page number. Or if it's an online source, which many of you will be using, just the author's name. And how that author's name must be on the works cited page at the end of your paper. The works cited page is very important for this research essay since it is a list of the sources that you consulted. So remember also on the works cited page for the research essay, you do not have to include work that is not directly cited in your writing of the paper. But why would you not? Since you did spend time going over that video about the Gilded Age from PBS, for instance, that you didn't cite in the paper, but you still use it as a resource. So I want to put all of my sources on the works cited page, including the ones that are not directly quoted. So please keep that in mind. The writing process on page 1080 is something that we have talked about quite a bit and that I refer you to again in this week's module. And in this writing process, it goes through the entire process from the beginning, which now you're well into the writing of the essay, the research essay. So you've already done generating a topic, right? Brainstorming, creating a cluster diagram, creating an informal outline, creating a formal outline, focusing on how can I write a good thesis statement, and research, of course. And so this is all review for you. However, it can be useful as you enter the editing and proofreading stage of your paper, and it can be useful if you get stuck. So I'm pointing out here in this whole section, this is a resource for you to be able to use. Just like the Reading and Writing Center, where you can take your essay and have someone go over it with you before you hand it in, is a resource for you. So please use the resources that are available to you. On 1093, the literature research essay is specifically focused on, and you can go through what resources do. You can go through what the research process is like in finding secondary sources, etc. Everything is laid out for you in this part of the text. And even it gets down to on page 1106, poetry research and writing a research essay about a poem, and how do I quote poetry when I'm quoting three or fewer lines of poetry. The quotation is in quotation marks with slashes for the indication of where line breaks occur. And if I'm using more than 3 lines of poetry, I indent those lines. And that's shown to you in this example. So you can look at that. Quoting itself is spent, there's a good deal of time spent on quoting itself in terms of how do I punctuate quotes, how do I change quotes, use an ellipsis for removed words from quotes, strategies for effective quoting, and then citation and documentation. So there's a lot of information here for you. And as you're rounding the corner toward handing in the final draft of your essay, you are encouraged to use this information to your benefit. Let's look at the sample essay, page 1134. And I'd just like to go through some of the important points here. Please notice that this sample research essay is, its introductory material is based on the research before the person discusses the short story that she's focusing on, which is the short story is an Alice Munro story, Boys and Girls, which we aren't reading for the class, but that's of no matter since there are examples here that could be used for any research essay. So please notice at the beginning we get the research. In 1960 is the first opening line, first sentence. An article in the Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism asked a question still worth asking over 60 years later. What is an initiation story? And now I know that this person, throughout this entire essay writing, is going to be focusing on what an initiation story is, what it has been in the past, perhaps, and what this short story by Alison Munro is in relation to the initiation story. In other words, what kind of initiation is the short story Boys and Girls? That article in the second sentence by Mordecai Marcus points out that literary critics frequently, quote, used the term initiation to describe a theme and a type of story, unquote, but that they didn't all use or define it exactly the same way. Marcus defines it as a story that, quote, shows its young protagonist experiencing a significant change of knowledge and the world or himself, or a change of character, or of both, which must point or lead him towards an adult world. Parentheses 222. Let's break this down. Notice in this sentence, the author's name appears in the signal phrase. That article by Mordecai Marcus points out that literary critics frequently, quote, used the term initiation, etc. But his name, the name of the source, is included in the signal phrase that leads to the quote, to the main quote. And therefore, if his name appears in the signal phrase, I do not need to include it in the in-text citation. That's why 222, page 222, is the only thing in the in-text citation here. Otherwise, it would need to say Marcus 222. And what does that mean? That means that Marcus is a source. And so if I turn to the end of the paper on page 1143, I see that Marcus, comma, Mordecai, period, is the author of the source, What is an Initiation Story? From The Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism, Volume 19, Number 2, Winter 1960, pages 221 through 228. And where did she find it? JSTOR. And there's the URL for that. So that is how in-text citations relate to works cited pages. Every in-text citation, every author in the paper must be included on the works cited page. At the bottom of the page on 1134, published 15 years after Marcus's essay, however, Allen Ginsberg's The Female Initiation Theme in American Fiction, 1975, suggests that it matters more what gender the story's protagonist is, etc. So there's a second major source. And then if I look again at the end of the paper on 1143, I find that her name, Ginsberg, is included. Ginsberg, comma, Elaine. The name of the journal article, which is in quotations, The Female Initiation Theme in American Fiction. The journal in which that article is found, which is in italics, because the names of journals which contain many articles in them, so it's the overarching container of all of those journal articles, that is in italics, and then it has a URL, etc. there as well. So we don't find out specifically about, aside from the title of this essay, about the source that the person's writing on, the primary source, until page 1135, Alice Munro's Boys and Girls, published in 1968. So she's got the research first. This is not the only way to do it, and we've talked about doing it an entirely different way by placing your thesis first. However it works for you is how I want you to do it, which is why I've left it open-ended, because people are unique beings and we don't need to follow a schemata in order to write something. We figure it out according to our own intelligence, according to our own needs and the needs of the essay itself. We don't get the thesis until the bottom of page 1135. Rather than being either a male or female initiation story, Boys and Girls is both. Boom. So then we get much information about that with many sources, and I'd like to lead your attention to page 1138 and look at, and 1139, and look at two different quotes. So on the bottom of page 1138, the bottom paragraph, the first sentence of the bottom paragraph on page 1138, the narrator is thus, in a way, quote, aided or guided by an older, unquote, person of the same sex, as boys in initiation stories are, according to Ginsberg. So again, there's a source, because I have a quote, and we have the author in the phrase, in the language that's already in the paragraph, Ginsberg. So in my in-text citation, I only need page 31, which refers me again to Ginsberg on page 1143, and there's the source, and I can go online and look for it, and then I turn to page 31, and there is the phrase, aided or guided by an older person. So that's a direct quote from a secondary source. Page 1139 is a little bit different. It's a source, but inside that source is a quotation from another source, and the person writing the essay wants to include that other source included within this one source. So it's a quote within a text. On page 1139, second full paragraph, in this way too the story actually seems to reflect, and then down to the next sentence. Munro biographer Halvard Dolly claims that many Monroe stories include, quote, unfulfilled and despairing mothers, like Monroe's real mother, a former teacher who, quote, expended her energies during the formative years of the 3 Laidlaw children in the nurturing of a family under conditions of deprivation and hardship, unquote. And after the word hardship, quote marks, followed by an in-text citation that says QTD in Nischik. Quoted in Nischik. Okay, so it doesn't say D-A-H-L-I-E, Halvard Dali, the biographer. It doesn't say him. It says Nischik. And then if I turn now to 1143 and look for Nischik, I find that there it is, Reingard im Nischik. Undoing Gender, here's the name of the article. It's in quotation marks. Undoing Gender, Alice Munro, Boys and Girls, 1964. And notice that all of these sources relate directly to her topic about initiation and boys and girls stories and gender. And then I have Gale Resource, Literary Resource Center. You can find this in the Gale Resource Center in the library that we have been talking about in the library video. And there is the URL and there are the page numbers. Okay, so this is a source that includes inside of it a quote, and that quote is being quoted in the paper. That's what QTD means. So I have 2 different kinds of in-text citations here. I have a direct source and I have an indirect source. The indirect source includes the quote that I want to include in my paper. And I need to give a nod to where the actual quote is found, which is in this source, right? And it's a biography apparently. And inside that biography is a quote that the biographer is quoting and that the writer of this paper wants to quote as well. Quotes within quotes. Quotes within sources. All right, so, and you can look through that for your paper. Just remember, I'll leave you with this one last idea. I want to be as smooth as possible with as few disjunctions, back to that word, as few disruptions, disjunctions, however you want to think about it, as I can possibly have in a paper. So I want it to be smooth. My transitions between my words and the words of a source need to be smooth, need to be clear, need to not be jumpy. All right? So keep that in mind as you're writing your papers. And a very good habit to get into is to read out loud your writing to yourself. You can hear a lot of mistakes by simply reading out loud and correcting according to how that sounds to your ear. Our ears know a lot, so use them to your advantage. All right, I will speak with you more soon. Thank you for listening.